Okay, so today we're going to be going over our last lesson of Unit 1, which is Lesson 6, which is mostly going to be focusing on word problems. Okay, up to this point, we've been focusing on slope, y-intercept, how to graph them from an equation, how to create an equation from a graph, and we've just been working with kind of the math, but now we're going to be going over some questions that would be applicable, right, to model certain scenarios in real life. Right, so we have a word problem here that says we have Pluto's Perfect Printing Company prints programs for the Oakville Blades Hockey Club. They charge $10 to set up the printing press and an additional $2 for every program printed. Right, it says complete a table of values for 1 to 4 programs. Define the variables. All right. Normally, like I said, in every equation, we have y. Hold on here. Let me get my pen out. It's just going to let me do it. Here we go. We'll have like a y equals mx plus b. All right, that's the equation we've been working with. But now, our y variables and our x variables represent something in real life. So we have to kind of state what they represent. So in our table, I'm going to put x, and I'm going to put y here. And you can choose any letters you like. I just like to use x and y because they're just the same ones, and it kind of gets me into a pattern every time I do a question. So it has Pluto's Printing Company prints programs for the Oakville Blades Hockey Club, $10 to set up the printing press, an additional $2 for every program printed. All right, so what we have to decide is what is our x variable going to be and what is our y variable? All right, in every question, y variable is the cost. All right, the end result, what you get at the very end. So in this question, what's the cost? We're talking about the cost of the program. So this will have y as our total cost. And the thing that's going to change our cost is how many programs they print. So that's going to be my x variable. It's my programs printed. All right, now we can just jump right into the question and kind of model that through our table of values. So they say we want to go from 1 to 4 programs. So if we have one program, it says they're going to charge a $10 flat fee right off the bat and then $2 for every program printed. So that's going to be 10 plus 2, which equals $12 to start. Then we'll go, okay, well, what happens when we have 2 programs? Well, that's going to be $10 to start plus basically 2 times 2 because we have 2 additional magazines, which is going to equal $14. All right, because this is a linear equation, this is always going to be a pattern every time, but let's pretend like we didn't know that. If we have 3 magazines or 3 programs, we still got to pay that additional $10 plus $2 for every additional program printed, and we printed 3 of them. So 10 plus 2 times 3, 2 times 3 is 6, so that's going to give me 16. And for my fourth one, again, $10 was my starting point, but now we printed 4 magazines at $2 each. When we add that up, we'll get 18. All right, so we can see that basically every additional magazine is going to cost us $2. From that table, we now have to determine the equation of a line. So, what do we need to do to figure out that equation of a line? So we have y equals mx plus b. We have to find out the slope and the y-intercept. And we can tell the slope by figuring out if we're going, this is in our first lesson we did this. If we're going up, and let me get rid of these things here. Every time we're going up 2. Remember in the first lesson what we did to find our slope from a table of values, the y values going up, we call this the rise, and the x values are all going up by 1. Those are called the run. And then we can just divide the 2. So m is going to equal 2 divided by 1, which equals 2. which makes sense. Every time we buy an extra magazine, we have to pay an additional $2. So now we have 2x as our, as our slope. But what's the b value? The b value is the y-intercept, which is the value when x equals 0. So instead of doing any math, let's just look at our table. All right, and I'm just going to draw this in here, a little one. All right, so our table went from 1 to 4. So we had 12, 14, 16, 18. Well, we want the value when x equals 0. That's our y-intercept. So since we're going up 2 every time, we can kind of work backwards and say, well, instead of going up, we're going to work our way back. And we're just subtracting 2 every time. So that means that at 0, if we didn't buy any magazines, that would cost us $10. And that is our y-intercept right there. All right, so that means b has to be equal to 10. All right, which means our equation is y equals 2x plus 10. Now that's the way to use the table. What we've done in the previous examples, when we've had to find that out, is we've subbed in a point into our equation, which we still could have done, because each kind of column or each row in our table of values is a point on our graph. So we could have subbed in one of those points and got the same answer, but I think that makes it the easiest way to do it is to use the table and kind of just work backwards. So now we have in our equation 2x plus 10. Now it says graph the relation includes labels and scales on the axes. All right, so I'm going to draw in, and let's do, let's see here, we go from 1 to 4. So here is my x and y axes here, draw them in. Now let's get labels. Remember, the x always goes along the bottom, and the y runs up and down. So we called our x programs printed, and we called our y variable the total cost. So now that we have our axes labeled, we just have to kind of figure out what our scale is going to be. So along the bottom, we're just going to count up by 1 because our table goes up by 1. So we're going to have 1 program printed, 2 programs printed, 3, and 4. All right. Up the y-axis, we have to figure out, okay, we have to find a scale. And because the numbers only go up to 18, I'm thinking I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Basically 8 spaces. So I have to find the right number to pick. Now this is a little trick. Because our first value at 0 starts at 10, if I have to do this, and let's say I do 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, we can do that, but then I kind of have to waste a lot of space because I really just want to start at 10. So the way to get around this, and maybe you learned this a little bit in elementary school, is you can put this little symbol in, which is like a little zigzag, which lets you jump to the first number you want to start at. So I really want to start at 10, but then I'm just going to go up by 2 every time. So using that little symbol there lets us make a jump to the first number, and then we can just go up by 2 every time. Now let's graph it. So when we sold 0 magazines, it cost us, right, the first point was 0, 10. When we bought 1 magazine, it cost us $12. Right? When we bought 2 magazines, it cost, or sorry, programs, sorry, they cost us 14 and 16, and then a total of 18 when we bought 4. As you can see, they all line up perfectly, so we know we've done it right because we're working with linear lines. And then we just need to draw our line, and we're done. Now you can see in this graph, I didn't include any of the negative side, right? But it's impossible to have a negative amount of programs purchased. So I don't need to worry about drawing a grid that looks like this because there is no negative side. All right, in real life, you can't have a negative amount of magazines purchased. All right. So then it says, what does the slope represent? The slope was 2, and in this question, every time we bought a magazine, we paid an extra $2. So our slope, if I do this word problem here, our slope was the cost for every additional magazine. Oh, not magazine, program, sorry, purchased. So every time we added an additional program, we had to spend $2. The y-intercept represents our base value, right? Which is why in the equation y equals mx plus b, we use that letter. And the base value is just our starting amount. All right, so we start at $10 before we've even purchased anything. We have to pay $10 up front. That is our base value. All right, so then it says, use your equation to determine the cost of printing 550 programs. So we have to find the cost. So we have to determine the cost means we have to find y when x equals 550. So our equation is y equals 2x plus 10, and then we'll sub in the value 550 for x. Now we have to do that multiplication. 2 times 550 is 1,100 plus 10, which equals 1,110. And whenever we're doing word problems, we should always just kind of write a therefore statement. So therefore, the cost of 550 programs is $1,110. All right, and there we go. So now that was a lot. Let's kind of slow it down and go over this one more time before you start. So when you have a word problem, all right, so Pluto's Perfect Printing Company, every word problem this unit, there will be a base value, which is in this question, the $10 that they charge to set up. That 10 is always our base value. So our B equaled 10 right off the bat. And then they say they charged an additional $2, and that number is always going to be our slope. All right, so if we could pull that information out of the question, we can immediately set up our equation and then finish it off from here. Using a table of values does help, but that's the way that we can just read the question and get our equation from there as well. So we don't have to do this, although it is a nice step to kind of visualize how much we're going up by every time. All right, so that's one example there. I know it's only one. You have lots of practice questions. All right, and please, all right, ask me for help if you have any questions. Other than that, you guys can start, and best